From the Broken Desk of Ferdinand von Aegir. Written by Time and Time. Read by Arashi. They arrived at the von Aegir townhouse in small numbers, 3 assistants, a bishop, a scholar of the recent war, and a locksmith. The townhouse was Duke von Aegir's main residence when not in his territory, and it was known he spent most of his time at his desk, the tea room close behind. The Duke's legacy is a noble one, a story that will surely go down in the textbooks about the best of humanity, about how each of us, no matter where we are born, can turn to the goddess and embody the chivalry Fargus stands for. He is dead now. Not long gone, no, only a week or so in the ground. He wasn't the first of the war's great heroes to fall, and he's not the last either. Locksmiths and mages alike can't pry the locks to his private desk, but the Duke never had children. The rest of his family has been wiped from history in the Great Bloody Smear. He has no heir. The search through his desk is a final bid at finding someone he would have wanted to run his territory. So they call for Margrave Gautier, and the Lance of Ruin reduces the twice-enchanted desk to splinters. The scholar, insistent and annoying in equal measures, ensures everything passes by his hand for him to mark down. "You are worrying about tomorrow," he says. "I am worrying about centuries from now." He's too obnoxious for anyone to bother arguing, and so he gathers his papers and writes a title on the top of the first blank page. Quote, "A list of items found in the locked desk drawers of Duke Ferdinand von Aegir, first of his title, defector from the Adrestian Empire, hero of a great war the vicious emperor rained down upon the lands. They are in no particular order." He nods, satisfied, and organization begins. 1. A stamp, marked with the crest of the Prime Minister of Adrestia. It's useless now, the eagles that adorn it a symbol of violence that has finally been purged from the land. Still, it rests there, gathering dust between the curves of the carved feathers. 2. A collection of paper, scorching and smelling faintly of ash and the burn of holy magic. They are far beyond legibility. 3. More paper, bunched up and shoved in the back corners of a tightly locked and rarely opened drawer. When unfolded, the papers reveal smeared ink along the crumples. Each page only has a few lines at most, quickly pettering off. A choice few. Quote, "I used to believe you knew this was wrong." Quote, "Have you spoken to my father recently? Is he even alive?" Quote, "Hello. I hope that despite our conflict, this letter finds you well. I would not wish harm on you. I never could." 4. Another paper, torn and halfway burnt, more aggressively ripped than the others. But yet, the words are still legible. Quote, "I hope your bones rot at the bottom of the Brigid Sea." Nothing, so far, has explained the mysterious Duke von Aegir. If anything, it's only made things more confusing. Gautier refused to look, and none of the other old heroes are within a week's riding distance, so anyone who might understand is a long way off. The scholar looks increasingly frustrated, gripping his pen more tightly with each discovery. They keep digging. 5. A box of horse items. Most are old and dusty. All are clearly labeled by a small piece of paper tied to them. Quote, "Hosey's first lead, attached to a piece of leather that is near indistinguishable from age. Lily's favorite toy, for a wooden ball covered in scratches and halfway cracked open. And then Cass's saddle strap, Elle's prettiest ribbon, Burns' last horseshoe." It continues in this pattern. 6. A pebble, smeared and cracked with a strange darkness. The assistant who picks it up screams and drops it on the floor, sending the rest of the room into a panic. He holds up his palm, revealing a burn. The bishop on duty picks it up with a cloth and says, brisk and annoyed, that it was most likely hit with a dark magic spell and left stained by the unholy power. No one asks why the Duke would possess such a thing, but everyone wonders. 7. A few pieces of dark hair, tied together with an orange ribbon. The edges are stained in blood, as if they were pulled from someone's head. Again, no one asks what everyone is wondering. 8. Tax records from the Duke's territory, which spans from his family's historical territory and Anbar. At first, these are set aside and dismissed out of hand, but a second, later look, scouting for anything useful, reveals they are a century out of date. The records of the Duke's father and the former emperor who slaughtered thousands. "Why are you all acting like this is some awful thing to find?" one of the Duke's former assistants asks, her fingers tapping on her arms in irritation. "She was his friend, wasn't she? And his princess. Of course he'd want to see if there were signs. Signs about what she'd become. Or perhaps what many said she had been all along." No one questions it, mostly because the assistant looks one more comment from burning the desk and its contents to ash, and then where would they be? The scholar's shoulders bunch. marking down in increasingly irrelevant details and opinions. But the search continues. 9. A pamphlet, torn and yellowed with age, that one of the assistants pulls free, then quickly drops with a yelp. Deeper review, and several hushed whispers around the room, reveal it to be one of the pamphlets the last emperor had spread across Fodlan, or at least a close copy. It speaks of supposed falsehoods of the church, that St. Saros was nothing but a liar, that the archbishop was a monster and a manipulator. Hearsay. Highly illegal hearsay. Even those who deal in history know better than to hold on to something like that. 10. The search is quiet now, no one looking at each other, avoiding sounds save the shuffle of papers and the scratch of a pen. The quiet is noted to explain the spill of ink above. After several minutes of silence, an assistant shouted in delighted shock and startled everyone in the room. The assistant held up an old letter, which had been folded and carefully tucked in a back corner. It's the best preserved piece of writing found thus far, despite its obvious age. More than that, it's not written in the Duke's elegant, loopy handwriting. Instead, the letters are sharp, small and brisk. To the point, no ink wasted. At the bottom, in clear font, are the words, quote, "Yours, whether the goddess wills it or not, H.V." The assistant who found it reads the opening as well as the ending. "Ferdinand, despite our differences, I am sure this letter will find you well. You are not the type to fall easily." No one bothers to continue after that, excited murmuring filling the room, even as the scholar makes a few desperate grabs for the ink-covered paper that's being held far out of his reach. A secret lover, almost certainly. That could mean a child, a legitimate heir, or, failing that, perhaps the Duke's lover would have some other idea of who he would want in his position. "Why do we care what the Duke would want?" the bishop mutters, but slams his mouth shut when one of the assistants glares at him. "Ugh, there's no name," the assistant who found the letter bemoans. "Now what?" "Are you an idiot?" the scholar asks. "Margrave Gautier is just down the hall. Go ask him." "He said not to disturb him." "Need I remind you, the Savior King himself told us to figure this out? Who would you rather piss off?" The group glares back and forth at each other, before eventually the bishop sighs and stands, dusting himself off. "Give it," he orders. He is the highest ranked among them, and the only one not employed by the crown to some extent. No one complains about the offer. The bishop takes the paper and heads down the hallway, past the long windows stained by the rapidly setting sun. The Margrave is sitting at a small table, drinking tea and working on one of the countless logic puzzles Duke Heir kept around. His hair has never thinned nor fully lost its color, bits of orange still peeking out, but it has mostly turned into a mess of silver and gray. Even with lines carved into his face and scars cutting through his flesh, he is as gorgeous as he was in his youth. Unfortunately, he's lost most of the soft edges over the years. He's still charming and kind, still a master negotiator, but he rarely puts up with what he disagrees with. His husband's influence, some say. Or perhaps war did not leave just the physical scars on his skin. Either way, he looks up as the bishop approaches and offers a polite smile. "Well, well, what do I owe the pleasure? Care for some tea?" "Do you know who this is from?" the bishop asks, because he has spent his whole adult life under the guidance of Archbishop Byleth, and, like most of his peers, has picked up on what some would say are her worst habits. He holds the letter in Gautier's face. "Well, I can't read if it's plastered to my nose," he says dryly. "And didn't I say to leave me out of it? It's about a lover, which means a possible heir. The king asked us to find one, so your help would be appreciated in figuring out who said lover was." The Margrave is silent for a moment before plucking the letter from the bishop's hand. He doesn't use much of his strength, but even so, the bishop would have had no chance of stopping him. His face is unreadable, eerily blank, and it stays that way as his eyes skim over the paper. He's a faster reader than the bishop quite expected. The Margrave is almost halfway down when his hand starts to clench on the paper, slowly crumbling it more and more. His gaze lands on the final line, and that's signature, H.V. His face remains unreadable, and it stays that way as he curls the paper into a ball in his hand. "Hey!" the bishop snaps. "We need that!" "No, you don't." Great. There's no point arguing with the Margrave when he gets like this, so the bishop just takes a deep breath. "Do you know who wrote it, at least?" The Margrave's expression hardens, and with a burst of magic his hand catches a light. The bishop yelps and stumbles forward, but it's too late. The Margrave opens his hand, and bits of ash and scraps of burnt paper flutter out between his fingers. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to," he says. Then he stands and walks out. The bishop returns less than 10 minutes after he left, eyes still wide and ash clinging to the front of his robes. The scholar updates his list, adding on to item number 10. The letter was lost shortly after discovery in an unfortunate accident It seems a former colleague of the Duke was not pleased by the information it contained and destroyed it. He doesn't dare name the culprit. After a few awkward minutes, the search continues. There's barely anything left, and only one cracked drawer left to sort. An assistant pulls it open, everyone watching in tense silence. It barely makes any noise, and when the broken hinges pop and reveal what's inside, it quite makes sense. There's only 2 items inside. 11. A sealed item with the Von Aegir crest, and labeled, "For the Historians," in the Duke's clear, elegant font. Luckily, this was retrieved for recording with minimal injury. A few scratches were sustained by others who tried to prevent the letter from being collected, but there was no blood. The letter is dusty, though it's not nearly as old as some of the other items found in the desk. The paper hasn't gone yellow yet. When unsealed, the letter inside proves to be roughly a page long. For ease of organization, its text is listed in the subsection below. A. To the historian who finds this, I'm sorry I could not give you a happier tale than mine. I spent so long being strong and proud in front of everyone, because what other option do I have? But I am old and sick now, and I'm tired. Just once, just this once, I want to be selfish. My apologies that you'll have to deal with the repercussions. When I was 18 years old, my country declared war on everything I believed in. 2 of the people I considered close allies and companions locked my father away and stripped my family of our titles. At the time, my choice was obvious. I had joined the Blue Lion House some moons prior and made friends among their ranks. So I stayed with them, and when she returned, I stayed with our professor, under a banner I believed in, to stop what I saw was a cause of pure evil. I was a foolish child. Evil exists, yes, but it isn't a desperate woman reaching for a better tomorrow. It isn't the man beside her who, for reasons we may never know, would do anything to help her to the world she dreamed of. Edelgard von Hresfelg, the Flame Emperor, was my friend, whether or not she saw me in the same light. More than that, she was, for better or for worse, my emperor. All my childhood, I had known my goal was to stand beside her, to aid her. As for Hubert von Vestra, Hubert was... He was a man I cannot begin to understand or describe, but who I desperately wish I could. His heart was good, and I know that sounds like madness, but I swear it was. There was a tenderness to him that he had buried so deep only a few could find it. He was loyal and brilliant, and clever in ways I cannot begin to describe to you. I was on the battlefields where they died. I watched the king strike down the monster Edelgard had become. I witnessed Dimitri try and save the woman who had long since chosen her path. I watched Felix cut down Hubert, who choked on his blood and kept trying to cast spells to protect Edelgard until he fell dead halfway through an incantation. Some stories were always destined for tragedy. Mine, I suspect, is one of them. I know the stories they will tell of the war. I know the horrors of it. I saw them firsthand. But I saw Petra struggling with her translations, and Linhart used to lecture me about being too much, whatever that means, while he bandaged my wounds. He did it even though he hated blood. One after the other, I watched them fall. Dorothea should have sung. They should still be talking about her in the opera houses. Bernadetta should have been a writer. Caspar, the greatest knight Sothis had ever seen. But they're gone. Every last one of them died so damn young. I stood for what I thought I believed in. I believed in justice, in good, in protecting others. But in doing so, I destroyed everyone I wanted to protect in the first place. I do not know if this information will become public knowledge, or if it will even reach the history books. But I wanted someone to know. I needed someone to know. My apologies. I hope I've left this world a better place than I found it. Also, on the subject of my heir, I have an illegitimate brother. His eldest daughter, my niece, lives in Enbar with her husband. Her name is Maria Black, and I've met her on several occasions. She's a strong, capable woman with a good heart. I leave everything to her and her children. Please don't ask more of me. I'm afraid this is the last that I can give. Signed and dated on the 4th of the lone moon, Duke Ferdinand von Aegir. 12. I tried to keep my distance from my work. I am a recorder and interpreter, nothing more. It is not my place to comment or interfere. But in this case, I will admit it took me a bit to retrieve and record the final item of the desk. But still, I did so. It is a small, curling piece of yellowed canvas paper with a pencil sketch on it. It is signed in the corner by an artist by the name of Ignatz. most likely the Ignots who helped lead the Leicester Alliance during the war and was lost in the Battle of Grounder Field. The sketch shows a classroom. A group of students are standing around one of the desks, talking eagerly. Judging by their appearances and uniforms, this is the final Black Eagles class, led by the Flame Emperor herself. Duke von Aegir is with them, waving his arms eagerly as he speaks to the future emperor and her retainer. The princess seems to be hiding a smile behind her hand, and her retainer looks mildly amused. The future duke is beaming. When flipped over, the paper reveals a handful of words in the duke's handwriting, clearly added years later. If they're burning, I hope I do too. That way I can see them again.